Hey everybody, welcome back to the Queen's Lair. I am your host, Kelly Miles, and this is part 2 of our series on the COVID effect. And so the COVID effects that we have going on today, we have a first responder. We have one first responder that's going to be joining the show and sharing her experience on the pre-COVID, during COVID, and the quote unquote post-COVID experience. And before I bring her on, I just wanted to put this disclaimer out there that the thoughts and opinions shared here today are not to be used as a medical diagnosis, as a treatment, or an official information from the CDC or any other government official. These are just solely the thoughts and opinions of the host and the guest who are appearing on the show. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring our guest on now. Hello, Lady O. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining. I'm excited to have you. And, before we get started, I actually have a quick video that I wanted to play real quick just to kind of give a glimpse of the experience of some of our first responders. So I'm going to share that video now, and then we'll go into talking a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and then the video itself. So we'll be right back. Wow. So just looking at that video is just absolutely amazing. And so, before we break down that video and talk a little bit about the experiences that some of our first responders have had, let me just introduce yourself. Introduce who you are, where you're from, and what level of first responding in your job that you've had to do, what your duties were as a first responder.
Well, if you look very closely, you will see that I have bags under my eyes, and that's because I do work as a first responder, as a CNA on the dementia floor, the night shift, and I love my job. So that is one thing about me that you would know. I am a singer, I am an author, I am a certified resolution therapist. I own a company, I own a business, I own a university. God has been very faithful to me, but I really want to spend time and talk about the topic today. But thank you so much, Kelly, for this opportunity once again.
Oh, absolutely. You're doing a whole lot of things. I'm surprised you ain't got whole suitcases under your eyes. Do you ever sleep?
Yes, I do sleep. Yes, I do sleep. I do have a strategy.
Good. You do need to have a strategy. So I guess my first thing that I want to go into and ask is, as it pertains to being a first responder, what was life like prior to COVID-19? What did it look like being a first responder, being in the medical field? I mean, and you have your special area that you work in, but I'm sure being in that environment, you get a kind of feel of everything that's going on. So prior to COVID-19, what was your experience like in the medical field?
Prior to that, there was naturally, I am a very, very empathic person. I'm an empath. But I can clearly say that prior to COVID, I don't think that I was as empathic as I am now. Like I think that I was in robotic mode, on cruise control prior to when I was prior to the COVID.
Right.
Yeah, now it's just very, very different. There's just so much compassion. I've literally watched them die. I have taken care of a patient on a Monday and morning, and like on a Monday night, like they're gone, or on Tuesday they're gone. So it's very different. So life before the COVID as a CNA, I took a lot of things for granted, but I did not realize that I was, and I was on cruise control as a worker. Yes.
And so, I mean, being in that industry and in that field, I'm sure that you see emergencies, in and out sometimes. But what was there a big difference? I mean, how did that impact you being in an environment going from what you consider normal, where you have your normal patients come in, your normal emergencies, to having a swamp of people coming in all at once? It's like, how do you handle that when you have so much coming on as a CNA?
I remember when I got my first COVID job. So I was sent to a facility because of the surge. So I was called a surge worker, and I literally worked for 83 hours.
Wow. And what's a storage worker? Tell us
And
a little bit about that first.
well, a surge worker is a worker that is hired at the time of a crisis, at a time
Okay.
of chaos. And so they had a lot of nurses, a lot of RNs, a lot of CNAs, a lot of facilities were just hiring people who were, of course, like credentialed, to work without going through all of the paperwork and the whole process, So that's a surge worker. They just throw you on the case,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, and then they can fire you afterwards or just let you go
Oh,
or
wow.
yeah, or say thank you or retain you, but you're known as you came to work because of the surge.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yes, and I remember that I worked 83 hours. And I remember
You
when I
free?
got off work, yes, 83 hours. And I remember when I got off work, um, it was a Sunday morning, and I think it was Easter. I think this was this was 2020. It was
Okay.
Easter.
Hmm.
Yes, it was Easter. It was some kind of holiday, and it was a Sunday morning. And I remember coming out, and I got on the bus, and I fell.
You fell on the bus
I fell on the bus. I fell on the
because
bus.
you were just
I
exhausted.
didn't know. Yes, I didn't know where I was. I passed out for like a second,
Wow.
and everybody picked me up and everything. And I remember struggling to be there,
Yeah.
until I got home. And I was very scared to sleep because with the way I was feeling, I was very, very sure that I would just sleep sleep on to the other side
Right.
because it was too deep, sister. So,
Yeah.
so I remember there was no makeup in 2020. There was
Yeah.
no
When do you have time for makeup?
no. I did see people wear foundation under, and I couldn't understand how they even had time to do that. Um, but I had to talk to a lot of families. I had to ensure a lot of families that their father was okay, that their mother was okay. I had co-workers who wouldn't want to work in that area, and so they'll throw me to that section. And I remember God telling me, because I had a patient who was COVID, and I remember walking like this and walking on eggshells. And I remember God telling me that you signed up to do this. So if you're not going to do this, leave.
Mm.
I heard it very, very very, very clearly. And
I
then
mean,
as
in this kind of field, and especially in the medical industry, you kind of need to have that kind of mindset. If you don't want to be here, because you have people's lives that you're dealing with here, and there's some nurses and doctors that they're doing it out of their heart, and so we need people when your life is at stake here, and they're looking for care from you, to have that kind of compassion.
yes. And immediately I remember I threw myself at this patient. I just threw myself into my job.
Mm.
And it is so ironic, as many patients that I have put in bags, as
Wow.
many patients that I have put the expiration date, because that's what we call it. When a patient dies, we don't say a patient died, we say the patient expired.
Yeah.
And so we have a card, and we write their name and their date of expiration, and
Mm.
we put that on their toe. I've done a lot of those.
Yeah.
I've cleaned a lot of bodies, and I've bagged a lot of bodies, and I've wheeled a lot of bodies to the morgue. After you do that for so long, you become a patient yourself.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. I was going to say, like, dealing with seeing the amount of deaths that you see on a regular basis during this time, how has that affected your own mental health, and what affected your own mental health the most?
Very ironically, God has kept me because I have never had COVID, and I really should have had it. Um, I really should have, because I've worked in 4 different facilities that were all COVID.
Mhm.
And I've hugged patients. Patients have vomited on me. I've, like, I should have had it, but God kept me, and He's still keeping me. However, my mind, I just noticed that it does something to you. Rather than making you more empathic, you become very numb. And the moment you realize that you're numb, and this is why a lot of people leave the healthcare system, because the very thing that caused them to be in the system, they are now the opposite of that thing. You're more irritable, you're angry, your pay is not at the rate as it should be, considering all you're being exposed to. You're working with very angry people. Um, Nursing and healthcare is very hierarchical. It's in levels, and that sets you up toxic for a toxic environment.
Yeah,
Yeah, because there are just so many levels.
yeah,
Um, and so when you add that on to caring for a patient who can't even say thank you because they can't,
yeah.
who doesn't know the magnitude of what you're going through. And then you come home and you have chaos in your home as well. You have all kinds of things you're dealing with too. And then you go to work, and then you go to church, and that life is chaotic.
It's chaotic.
Um,
Yeah.
and then you start to become numb. I mean, you're bagging bodies daily, cold
And
bodies
you
that
know,
will.
I don't understand because I've heard people say this, and I wanted to ask a medical professional this, or someone in that industry myself, because it frustrated me. So I can only imagine how it impacts you when you're in the hospital. You're dealing with all of the pressures and the stresses of the COVID itself, trying to keep yourself protected, trying to deal with the patients and keeping them alive as best as you can, dealing with all of the people who didn't make it, who expired, and then you have people who come in the emergency room, and they have a different kind of sickness, and they're getting angry at you guys because you're not able to tend to them immediately, or in the form that they're used to when pre-COVID times existed. So how do you deal with that? Because sometimes people will come and like, and not to make light of their, their emergency or their situation, but if you have, certain, I don't know, if it's, you hurt your finger or something and you go to the emergency room, we're trying to save people's lives, and not to take yours lightly, but they need to have a little patience and understanding with where you guys are. So what's your take on that?
My take on that is I used to reason like that, Kelly, but being a minister, and also being in this field, I have learned that pain is pain,
Yeah, that's true.
and there is no ratio to pain. And so when I went through my season of being numb, because that's what looking at dead bodies does to you,
Mm.
and I have a master's in death, and so I am around death, and I know a lot about death. It does something to you. It does make you numb. Nothing phases you at all.
Wow.
Yes, at all. You can't catch me off guard. You can't really make me upset to where I lose my mind. Like, no. But the good side of that is that I am fully aware that everything is trivial,
Yeah.
because yeah, so because of the magnitude of what I've seen, everything else is trivial, everything else is infinitesimal. So I look at those type of patients as pain is pain, and I get it. And whenever I find myself not being empathic, I will call off work on that day, or I
Mhm.
will um, have to write in my journal, or I will have to tell myself, okay, Omenesa, is this a trigger? Because like some patients are triggers, and you find yourself projecting, especially in a nursing home. You find
Yeah.
people who are just like your father, or just like your mother, or just like somebody in the church, who dogged you or whatever, especially on the dementia floor where they cuss you out. And all you do is work for 8 hours or 16 hours, double shifts like I do, and they cuss you out,
Yeah.
and if you don't know what your assignment is, you would find yourself being upset as somebody who doesn't even know what they're doing, you
Yeah.
know.
You gotta have that
So
patience.
yes, you have to have patience, but you really, really have to be in a constant state of self-reflection,
Mhm.
of what would I do if I was in the situation.
Yeah.
Just imagine being trapped in my mind, or being
Yeah.
trapped by pain. Pain is pain. So if I see you screaming because you have a boo boo on your finger, like I'll take it as seriously as somebody who has a pain in their chest.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like in managing your own emotions in this process, you just stay self aware, knowing where you are mentally. And if you feel off and you feel that you're not having the necessary compassion that you need, take off that day so that you can get yourself together, write out your feelings or whatever that helps you to ease your pain and ease your mind to do those things. And also just to be understanding and putting yourself in the other person's shoes to see what they're going through and why they're responding the way that they are and understanding that. So I think that's a great way of dealing with stressors and stresses in a society that we're living in right now and in the conditions that we've been living in. So I'm really, excited. The next thing that I want to talk about is how you learned to trust God through this process and what your faith has gone to in dealing with this situation. So we're going to take a quick commercial break and then we'll be back in about 30 seconds. And when we come back, we'll jump right back into the conversation starting right there. Hey, everybody, welcome back. You are watching the Queen's Lair Christian Talk Show, and I am your host, Kelly Miles. We're talking with Lady O, and we're talking about the experience of our first responders pre COVID, during COVID, and post COVID, quote unquote. And I say quote unquote because technically, the restrictions have been lifted, activities have resumed as usual, but the virus is still out there. People are still being impacted. So that's why I say quote unquote. And before we dropped off for our commercial break, we were talking a little bit about how Lady O, as a medical professional, what is it, CNA, manages her emotions when dealing with all of these things and how she writes some things down. And sometimes she takes days off when she needs to. And she tries to put herself in other people's shoes so that she can understand what they're feeling and what's going on. And so now what we want to kind of jump into is talking a little bit about how did God move in your situation during this time? How did you see him move? And what did you learn about trusting God during this period?
Well, when the COVID hit, I lost my job and I got evicted the very same day.
Mm,
My landlord passed, and then they were letting a lot of people go at work who were per diem workers. So I was literally homeless when the COVID hit. And I remember going to church, and I just stayed at the church. And while I got an agent to help me look for a house, whenever I would go to the appointments, they were not opening the doors, or we would bang on the door, or we would call and they wouldn't answer. And then it dawned on me that, oh, there is a virus going on. And but eventually, in the midst of that, in the midst of death, God gave me life. In the midst of death, God gave me a roof over my head. He gave me my place. In the midst of death, God gave me 4 jobs, to where I was struggling on which one to choose. In the midst of death, I was getting money from 4 or 5 different streams of income.
Wow.
in
Yeah.
the midst in the midst of COVID, I was learning so much about myself, and how I am more scared than I thought I was.
Wow.
I am more frail than I thought I was. The COVID made me um, realize that life truly is short. And you know that my tagline is nothing happens in the grave. So that
Yes.
actually really gave me more passion for my purpose, more passion for my mission. Because truly nothing does happen in the grave, and we don't know when our expiration date will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, when you were in those moments and, were there any points where you're in the room with someone and they're scared? How do you encourage them? And understanding as a minister, you pray for people and you want to minister to them. And so how do you get your message across and not be offensive? Because, some people may not be there yet, or may not believe what we believe. So how do you engage and interact with those people who are laying there that you're in the hospital and you're caring for, and you're trying to encourage them? How do you balance that?
You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay, because if the patient dies, they're going to be okay. In fact, like, they're really going to be okay, right? and and if they stay, then they got better, so they're going to be okay. And so that's what I always say: you're going to be okay. And a lot of them know what I mean.
Yeah.
They know that it's a double-edged statement. A lot of people in the hospital know,
Mm,
so like, it's not like you're um um being offensive. People know what you mean, without being so direct. And of course, you can't hold their hands or rub their head or whatever because of the COVID, so you're going to be okay, and picking up the phone and putting their family on speaker,
yeah.
and having them hear their family's voice. Or you could ask them if you could pray with them, and some of them will say no, and some of them will say yes,
Yeah.
and making sure that the chaplain of the hospital, you know, is present, and coming to visit them and stuff like that. But that's another thing too with the COVID, is that I found myself in a hospital where I actually went to train for chaplaincy
Oh,
during
cool.
the COVID. Yes, I
Yeah.
went to train there, and I I ended up not taking the class, but the head of that class really impacted a lot in my life when I was going to him for the process, the registration and counseling and whatever. And he told me so many things that I needed to know. And I just knew that that was not the season for me. But I got my miracle and I got my blessing, and I was able to move on without any hangups. So in the COVID season, I was able to open my university, Emotional Healing
Mm,
University, because everybody was
nice.
home, and
Yeah.
we graduated over 250 students, and
Really?
the school now is up and running. I have an organization that I've been running for 11 years, but in 2020, it was just a women's organization called Pearls International. In
Okay.
2020, I switched it up and changed it to Pearls and Paws International, and we had men come in, and we open a whole lot of other branches, and I was able to hire more directors. And so now, like, the organization is just like wildfire.
Wow.
So I was able to really accomplish a lot during the COVID, because it was a time of of intimacy, having
Yes.
intimacy with
Yes.
myself. And I think a lot of people experience that too.
So that's amazing. That just goes to show that with all of the devastation going on, that God is still glorified in everything that he does and
Oh, yeah.
everything that, we do in our lives when we do it according to his word and his will. And it's just great to see that even in the midst of the pandemic and facing the devastation all around us, God is still moving. God is still God, and he will still be glorified in spite of the challenges that we're faced with. So I appreciate you sharing that piece as well. That as hard as it's also been when you dedicate your life to Christ and you're doing everything that you can to follow His will, that He's going to take care of His children no matter what. And so I just thank you for sharing that. And so we got to get ready to close. So just take a minute and share some words of encouragement to those who are out there, who are your fellow first responders, and just encourage them in their place, because maybe they don't have that book that they can write in. Maybe that's not their thing. Maybe they haven't found their release yet when they're going through these things. So just share some words of encouragement before we get ready to close out.
So first of all, I will say that if you really because now by now those in healthcare already know the profession because they've seen both sides. I will encourage you to leave this job if you do not like this job. You already know that the pay is not up to the sweat. You already know that there's a lot of wear and tear on your body. If you are not called to the healthcare field, if you are doing this job just for the money, that's not fair on your patients and that's not fair on you. I will encourage you to use all of your talents and all of your gifts because you do have a whole lot more in there, and bask in it and invest in yourself and leave that profession so that you could cleave to something that is of a higher calling that you were called to do. Now, if you decide to stay, I encourage you to have a journal. I encourage you to dance a lot when you're taking a shower. Listen to Afro beats music. Listen to praise and worship. Listen to Bollywood music. Dance your butt off. Dance, dance, dance. I will encourage you to put on makeup. Yes. Put on makeup when you're going to work so you could just feel like you were going to a party, and take charge of your environment. Take charge of that place. Turn everybody into your friend. You know how it is with all the colleagues and all of the rivalry and all of the gossip and all of that in healthcare. But don't gossip with anybody. Let your life literally be the Bible. If you are a Muslim, let your life be the Quran. Let your life be of God. And see your patient as literally an exam that you have to pass. Because if you don't pass this exam, it's going to show up in another aspect of your life. It could show up in your friendships. It could show up in another job. It could show up in your marriage. It will show up in your children. It will show up. So pass the exam. God bless you.
That was amazing. That was so encouraging and inspiring. Thank you so much,
Thank
Lady O,
you.
for joining, for sharing your experiences and your story. I know it's going to bless so many people.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you.
Absolutely. So now I am just going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I did have a few things that I wanted to say. When you're dealing with these kind of stresses and dealing with all of these things, cast your cares on God. Be anxious for nothing. Philippians 4:6 says, do not be anxious for anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And it also says that what can a man add to his life? How much can he add? Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? And that one is Luke 12:25. I couldn't get it out, but that's Luke 12:25. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? So please make sure that you just give your life to Christ and trust that He has got your back and He will get you through. And thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for our next episode. part 3 of the COVID Effect series. And also, if you want more episodes, you can check out our YouTube page right here on the screen. So make sure you check out our YouTube page and stay tuned for the next episode. Take care. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching The Queen's Lair. Stay tuned for the next episode.